Hello, out of this binary viewers, it's Timmy here. For the next few fluffy weeks, I'm going to be uploading the content behind my WMEA project, which is Washington Music Educator Association. It is my trans advocacy project called Transgender Discussion and Music, a Non-Binary Voice. This is part one to my hour-long presentation, and in this part, I'm basically introducing who I am, the importance of being a trans ally, like how to be a trans ally, what to remember. Sorry. Just scrolling through my phone, seeing the parts. Oh, and then I talk about there's going to be a packet that I hand out at the conference that's available in the description below. So I talk about a little bit about the packet and some homework and further readings that they can do. And then I introduce the premise to the story that I'm going to be telling. So before we actually hop into the presentation and the material behind that, I'm actually going to start and just say openly how I feel like I have progressed with this, and I want to mention some areas that I feel could still use some more growth, and then areas within this presentation that I feel really strong, and areas I feel like I'm glowing in. Glows and grows, you know? So let's start with grows right now. So I think something I am still trying to work on is getting more aware of the inflections in my voice. I feel like in all the recordings that you're going to hear in these videos, my voice isn't very inflective. I do feel like I kind of speak monotone a little bit. It's something I'm still trying to work on. I will say that I feel like when I've recorded myself actually presenting to people, I start to have more inflections in my voice, so it is kind of different when I'm around others, and it is pretty different because right now I'm just like recording into my laptop and it's just me and it's feeling just kind of like awkward for me, and that's probably why my voice is a little dull. Um, and I was also, when I was recording it, I was also really trying to focus on trying to speak at a good pace because I've had people tell me when I presented that I can have a tendency to speak a little fast. And part of that was because I also had a lot that was loaded into the original draft for this presentation, so that has to do with it, but I was still trying to be self-conscious in it when I was doing the recording. So that might have something to do with it. Um, and as far as the content area in this introduction, I feel like it's pretty straightforward, and I think that's good, but I'm still wondering for myself if I can try to instill the same passion in this part of the lecture content that I'm delivering and the lecture content that you're going to be seeing in the videos later that has to do with my narrative. I still feel like some of what I'm delivering is a little bit dry, even though it is like important stuff to get out there. Um, and I really like how I structure the introduction to my narrative, and I think well, you'll see it at the end, but I like my claim about my story. I feel like it's bold and it um, grabs their attention. My only concern with having just like a bold assertion like that is just I don't want music educators to get the wrong idea about their content and know like the claim that I made is like highly personal, and um, it came from like a highly personal context, and it can't be like that necessarily for every trans and non-binary musician. So my glows, I think I do an adequate job talking about my background and the packet content. I feel like I'm very carefully constructed when I deliver the definitions. Um, and I feel like I've taken more time to be more persuasive about the purpose and why this matters and like the stakes behind trans and non-binary inclusion in the music classroom. And as I said earlier, I do like the boldness behind the claim about my narrative as a non-binary person in music. I feel like that's really going to get people's attention and draw them in. So here we go. Let's hop into the presentation. Please leave comments and tell me what you think of this. If you have any constructive criticism on it, totally feel free to tell me. If you just really liked it and think it's awesome, tell me that too, you know, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this clinic, Transgender Discussion in Music and Non-Binary Voice. My name is Timmy Flock. A little bit about myself. In 2017, I was honored to earn my bachelor's degree in music education from University of Puget Sound. I have hope for what is to come in my future. I'm at Puget Sound for the Master's in Teaching program, and after that, I'm looking forward to becoming a high school band teacher in a Washington State school district. My music experience has been full of magic and excitement. Here are some of my involvements and accomplishments. I performed in several ensembles during undergrad. One of my most significant honors was being one of the selected winners for the concerto aria competition on the Maslanka Saxophone Concerto, and performing this piece with the Wind Ensemble in February of 2017. I am a transgender person. I have been out as transgender for over a year now, and even at the very beginning of my coming out process, I took towards advocacy. My first steps towards advocacy was writing for my gender and sexuality magazine on campus called Wetlands. Nowadays, I volunteer with queer youth in Tacoma at the Oasis Youth Center, a center dedicated to community outreach, developing leadership, and education. This project is the centerpiece of my advocacy work, and it is something I am hoping to submit to WMEA State Conference and NAfME Northwest Regional Conference. The main focus of this clinic is to make active and effective trans allies out of music educators. It is a focus that is divided by two persuasions: how to be a trans ally and what you should know to better understand and empathize with trans experience. To start with, let's do a rundown of some Gender 101 so we are all on the same page. First of all, sex and gender are two different concepts. Sex refers to the categories into which humans are divided on the basis of their reproductive function. Gender refers to the psychological, social, and cultural aspects surrounding masculinity and femininity, which are pertaining towards the sexes. Second of all, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression are all different concepts. Sexual orientation refers to who you are sexually and or romantically attracted to. Gender identity refers to an individual's internal sense of gender. Gender expression refers to how one chooses to express one's gender identity to others through behavior, clothing, hairstyle, voice, body characteristics, etc. One common fallacy people make is that all trans women are sexually attracted to men, and all trans men are sexually attracted to women. This is not true, and this kind of fallacy leads to harmful arguments, such as trans women are just gay men that took it a little too far. There are trans women who are attracted to women, and trans men who are attracted to men. The only connection between sexual orientation and gender is that some communities will reinforce the notion that any sexuality that isn't straight breaks the rules of masculinity and femininity. This notion can be damaging and confusing to a trans person working through their identity, especially if it's a notion they end up internalizing themselves. Another common fallacy is simply forgetting that sex and gender are two different concepts because of assumptions that transgender means a person who medically transitions with hormones and surgeries to the opposite gender. This is a commonly enforced fallacy through media giving voice to the narratives of those who completely physically transition. Committing this fallacy often comes from a place of assumption, thinking that transgender people felt born in the wrong body. There are some trans people from the older generations that adhere to this phrase, but it has become a problematic phrase in this generation. One reason is that it makes sex and gender inseparable. Instead, trans people today would be more likely to say, I was socialized a certain way because of the body I was born in, or even the more brash way of putting it, I was treated horribly and wrong because of the body I was born in. When a trans person of this generation decides to physically transition, they would be more inclined to describe this process as going through gender-affirming surgeries instead of having surgeries to fit the right body. This better fits the notion of sex and gender being different concepts, and the decision to change one's secondary sex characteristics is to better affirm the gender they know themselves to be. In truth, transgender is an umbrella term for anyone whose gender identity differs from that which was designated at birth. Some transgender people go through hormones and or gender-affirming surgeries. Some transgender people do not go through these processes. Identifying as trans is not contingent on changing one's body. The opposite of transgender is cisgender, which means a gender identity is aligned to what was designated at birth based on physical sex. So while these terms will be used and their definitions reinforced throughout the course of this clinic, I'd like to pause to make sure we are all on the same page with these definitions. Please feel free to ask any clarifying questions now. Moving on with a few more definitions, some transgender identities. A trans woman is someone that was designated male at birth or born intersex and identifies as a woman. A trans man is someone that was designated female at birth or born intersex and identifies as a man. Then there are the terms non-binary and genderqueer. These are umbrella terms for identifying as neither a man nor a woman but something else. It is a term that is valid in transgender discussion as it still refers to psychological, social, and cultural aspects surrounding masculinity and femininity. However, it is different from trans man and trans woman in that it rejects the binary notion, with binary meaning two, of manhood and womanhood. Queer is an umbrella term for anyone that isn't straight or cisgender. Often centered in discussion around trans experience is the term dysphoria. Dysphoria refers to types of emotional, mental, and/or cognitive dissonance. There are two types of dysphoria. One is body dysphoria, meaning dissonance towards one's body parts that do not align or promote to one's gender identity. Another is social dysphoria, meaning dissonance when someone isn't treating you socially as the gender identity that you want to be perceived as. The overriding term that's inclusive of both of these dysphorias is gender dysphoria, meaning dissonance towards one's gender assigned at birth. While body and social dysphoria can be discussed about at two separate levels, it is good to have gender dysphoria as a general overriding term because body and social dysphoria can be interconnected. Dysphoria is a term that trans people have mixed feelings about. It's the terminology doctors and psychologists use to describe trans experience. Because of this, some feel the term's connotation is too clinical and reinforces the lie that being trans is a mental illness or disorder. Some trans people feel that spending too much time talking about one's gender dysphoria minimizes the trans experience, which is far more than just the dysphoria one has. Despite these mixed feelings, it is not an offensive term, and it is one I feel comfortable using. For one thing, the DSM-5 took out gender identity disorder from their book to replace it with gender dysphoria as a means to no longer pathologize trans people, as being trans is not a mental illness. The definition of the term is also accurate in describing experiences I've had with gender. Thus, I use the term especially because I feel like I can discuss how my trans experience is far more than just gender dysphoria. While these terms will be used and their definitions reinforced throughout the course of this clinic, I'd like to pause to make sure we are all on the same page with these definitions. Please feel free to ask any clarifying questions now. Great. Now let's move on to talking about the basic and straightforward actions you should take in order to be a trans ally. But first, I want to mention the reason I am advocating for gender identity in a clinic about music education. Music school departments and groups have been a home for many LGBTQ people. So many queer folks are moved towards these spaces because they literally need a creative outlet in their lives. The content area of music and the arts is already shaping the lives of queer people in such positive ways. You, as music educators, already have so much working towards your favor in building relationships with queer students through your content. Equipping yourself with the knowledge of how you can be an ally for trans students can make your space in the school district one of the most life-affirming places for them to be in. So, what can you do to be a trans ally as a school teacher? The simplest step is to use gender-inclusive language. If you have a student that is trans or non-binary, regardless of whether they have physically transitioned or not, ask them about what pronouns they use and do your best to always use it for them. Likewise, use all the proper honorifics and titles for them that aligns with their gender identity. If you have a trans woman in your class, her pronouns will likely be she, her, hers, and it will be very discomforting to her if you use any male-centric language to describe her, even in a casual manner, such as man, boy, dude, bro, guy, etc. Just don't use that for her. If you have a trans man in your class, his pronouns will likely be he, him, his, and it will be very discomforting to him if you use any female-centric language to describe him, even in a casual manner. Woman, girl, sister, miss, etc. Just don't use these terms for him. If you have a non-binary or genderqueer student in your class, their pronouns will likely be singular they, them, theirs, and it'll be very discomforting to them if you use any gender-centric language to describe them. Instead, use gender-neutral terms: buddy, friend, person, partner, student, etc. If you slip up sometimes using this proper language for your trans students, just apologize, correct yourself, and move on without making a big fuss over it. When addressing the whole classroom, opt out of addressing the class by ladies and gentlemen or boys and girls. Instead, use more gender-inclusive terms such as folks, people, students, or class. A common objection to using this language is that this is asking for special attention, coddling, and overprotecting students. It is simply not. It is about respect, manners, and being polite. If a trans student is misgendered or hears gender-exclusive language, there will always be a negative internal reaction. On a trans student's worst day, being misgendered could cause them to struggle with feelings of mental dissociation, personal offense, and depression. But even on a trans student's best day, being misgendered negates them, feels unprofessional, and can even be confusing. Gender identity can be so deep that a trans person can even hear the wrong pronoun being used for them and not actually be sure if the person is talking towards them. If these feelings seem strange and hard to empathize with as someone that is cisgender, please think about and consider if you'd feel the same way if you were constantly misgendered for a long period of time. Would you feel disrespected as well and struggle with the same feelings if you were exclusively expressing yourself as a man and you were being called miss? Think about if you were constantly misgendered but then suddenly had people calling you by the right gender. Would you feel a sense of relief? That would be the relief that a trans or non-binary person feels when they come out and are able to hear their pronouns, monikers, and honorifics. These are the simplest actions you can take as a school teacher to be a trans ally. However, the most important powerful action you can take as an ally is to have absolutely no tolerance for harassment against trans and queer students whatsoever. This means establishing your classroom right away as an environment where you do not tolerate this. A safe zone sticker on your office door is a subtle way to do this, or to have a poster that openly acknowledges no tolerance for this kind of harassment. An even more direct way to do this is to put this as a rule in your syllabus. But even further than this, I believe in teachers having absolute no tolerance for gender-based harassment. This protection applies to everyone and not just your trans kids. This is for cisgender men students that some may consider effeminate, and cisgender women students that some may consider masculine. All this harassment and compartmentalizing certain activities and expressions into exclusively being for certain sexes is very harmful, degrading, damaging, and does not make sense. If I were in a school district with the principal wanting to aim for being gender inclusive, I'd much rather see the principal ending all gender-based harassment and compartmentalizing than, say, remembering trans students' pronouns 100% of the time. Gender-based harassment leads to gender-based discrimination into adult life. This can affect everyone, even all the way to housing, employment, and medical care. Trans and non-binary people experience a disproportionate amount of this discrimination due to overwhelming statistics regarding harassment, physical assault, sexual violence, unemployment, suicide, and homelessness. I assert that through having no tolerance for gender-based harassment and harassment towards trans and queer students, you are providing trans students the opportunity to know what's of necessity for them and the decisions they make for their body, their social life, and their mental health. Setting a new precedent for lessening harassment towards trans students can mean an easier time with them figuring out if they need to go through hormones and surgeries. Setting this precedent means an easier time finding proper psychological help with gender struggles. Setting this precedent means allowing an easier space for trans students to participate culturally both inside and outside the classroom. With gender harassment still having a presence in our modern lives, affecting us from school to career, I must assert that we are still not able to fully comprehend the possibilities of gender identity. The more we lessen the harassment, the more your classroom can flourish and become a community where everyone, regardless of gender identity, thrives. If there is to be one belief I want to instill in you from this clinic, is that lessening this gender-based harassment benefits everyone to an incredulous degree. In order to comprehend this message as fully as possible, you will have some homework to do after this presentation. The packets I've handed out to you has material that we will not be able to go over all of. After this presentation, the sections you can read for review are the sections on how to be a trans ally, the definitions, and my music education philosophy statements. The sections that will specifically be for homework are a few of the definitions we did not cover, trans and non-binary people, and the sections dealing with scientific, social, and cultural information, such as the male-female brain dichotomy, psychiatric testaments, intersex, neurodivergence, historical cultures, and discrimination. There are a few other sections in here that aren't homework, but will be helpful for you to read about. These sections include some songs and pieces I've considered for programming and concerts, works cited and further resources, and my own personal collection of publications, prose, photography, research, and essays. On the front of this packet is my Google Drive, where you can go to see all the content that went behind this clinic and sound recordings of the clinic and music samples. We will listen to some music samples today, but some samples you will not hear today include some of my performances, art music snippets of my instrumental compositions, and singer-songwriter material. As I said earlier, I am a transgender person. I consider myself trans, non-binary, and genderqueer. The pronouns I go by are they, them, theirs. I'm completely out about this identity in all aspects of my personal and professional life. I'm my student teaching intern at Peninsula High School. The students call me by these pronouns and by teacher flock. To call me anything else is an insult on me professionally, as I have learned a lot about developing my own pedagogy through my gender identity. I'm not a sir or ma'am or a man or woman. I have always considered gender binary monikers oppressive and limiting because of the hard weight of what these monikers meant to me in my life experience. I only go by gender neutral monikers. In continuing to further the point on the importance of being a trans ally, the rest of this presentation will be about my narrative through the scope of music. During my storytelling, I want you to be thinking about the role harassment played in how I experienced my gender dysphoria and what it took for me to overcome this. As I am telling parts of my narrative, I will be reflecting over what I have learned in developing my own pedagogy through my experience with gender and what steps I believe in taking to becoming a culturally competent teacher. So, what is my story? I have always been transgender and always felt this way since age 5. I have received harassment and discrimination for this lifelong, and I have experienced gender dysphoria all my life. I have reached many different points in my life thinking that I needed a different set of hormones and to go through body surgeries in order to feel valid and whole. However, when I started wearing dresses and feminine clothing, changed my name, and switched my pronouns, I started feeling a connection to my body and to my social life that I never felt before. I realized all the moments where I was approaching this kind of connection to my body and social life has been in music, because music was ultimately teaching me how to love my body. This love developed not only because of the internal workings and effects of music on my life, but also the incredible compassion and empathy in the music circles I have been in. These music spaces have always been where I felt the most aligned socially, psychologically, spiritually, and culturally in my lifetime. It's affected me to the point where I don't ever see hormones or gender-affirming surgeries in my future. And this is the story I want to share with you today. I am trans, non-binary, and genderqueer. I'm not a man or a woman, but simply a person. And music is the place I reclaim my relationship towards my body.